I mess anything up. And it's quite a personal talk. It will be, I hope, about a lot about wildlife rather than the planning side of things. So I hope you all find it interesting. You might just have to bear with me a little bit at the beginning as I go through a few more interesting sort of things that aren't quite wildlife yet, but we'll come on to that. Okay, so I think so I'm a professional ecologist, and since March last year, there we go, like many of us, I was unable to work. Most of my work is usually overseas, so I started filling my time with other useful things, various voluntary bird surveys, butterfly transects and other things. And then a friend of mine, or a chap I hadn't actually met at the time, called James Murray White, he's in the audience tonight, we were going to meet for coffee, and he suggested, why don't we go to Denham Country Park, where there's an Earth Protectors camp as part of the Stop HS2 campaign. So I thought, well, that sounds very interesting. Why not? Let's learn a bit, see what's going on. So we ended up at Denham, and it absolutely changed my life, I have to say. And I think hopefully it's been useful. I've been in something useful with my time, my lockdown time since then. I met activists and locals from all walks of life opposing HS2. I'll say a bit more about what HS2 is in a moment. We got involved in monitoring wildlife that afternoon at Denham, because that's what people wanted to do, particularly water voles. Talk about that in a minute. I found myself becoming a kind of independent observer of wildlife changes along the HS2 route. And I tried very much to stay independent, at least initially. I think you'll see as we go on that my own views on HS2 changed relatively quickly as I started to get to know more about it. I became part of a team of ecologists, lawyers, activists, volunteers who were also monitoring the wildlife and helping to see what was going to happen to it. And I thought that the things I was learning, I mean, I'm quite a good ecologist. I like to think I've been involved as a professional ecologist for around 40 years now. But I was learning things about British wildlife and British wildlife law that I just didn't know. So I thought that might be useful to many of you, not just to do with HS2, although obviously that's where most of my examples are from, but for anyone who's interested in development going on in their neighbourhood or indeed in opposing that development. So hopefully there'll be some useful things in here. Okay, so this is a slightly blurry photo, I'm afraid, of Denham Country Park where we met. And this is a picture from the Daily Mail of HS2. Just what it might look like. More about the Daily Mail later on. And this is what Denham Country Park is suggested will look like. It's obviously an artist's illustration in the future. I suspect there's a little bit of artistic license there. It's a rather beautiful image. There's very little wildlife impact. It's just been put down there nicely at no effect. So obviously that's not likely to be the case. And this is where we actually met up and had a coffee over a sort of campfire. This is the site of a planned temporary bridge. The bridge is now in place. It'll be there for about 2 or 3 years across a beautiful chalk stream at Denham. Denham is just within the M25, not too far from Heathrow, by the way. These are security guards on both sides and a structure in the middle which activists used to try to stop anybody completing the bridge. A number of these structures were around sites. There's a lot of activist camps along the HS2 route. And the whole reason for the temporary bridge was to allow machinery into the country park, not to build the railway per se, but to move to electricity pylons which were in the way of that viaduct that we saw an image of just now. This is the route of HS2 phase 1 from London to Birmingham, and you'll note that it runs beside existing railway lines, which I think is quite an important point. So I started off, like many of you perhaps, thinking, well, am I for or against HS2? And I thought, well, trains, better than cars to get from place to place, must be a good idea. And I started thinking, well, yes, but use existing train lines more efficiently, increase train lengths, that sort of thing, rather than necessarily building new train lines, particularly when they run beside existing ones. If any of you have been on the crowded London to Cambridge train, I'm sure you can appreciate that perhaps that could be used better and more efficiently. HS2 runs us alongside existing lines. The idea is it'll reduce the travel time between London and Birmingham between either 20 minutes or from 1 hour 21 minutes down to 50 minutes, depending on what source of information you look at. And this will be a continuing thread throughout the talk, I think. It's often quite hard to find accurate information, different opinions. So 20 minutes is normally quoted by a lot of people. Completion date is likely to be 2040, or it's getting longer all the time. This is the largest infrastructure project in Europe. So it was well worth, I thought, getting involved in and thinking about. Our Prime Minister is very keen. Well, I've put dots after the end of the statement because I find it amusing, I'm afraid. And I think he's quite keen on lots of things that may or may not be keen on the rest of us. I'm sure you can think of a few examples from when he was Mayor of London and elsewhere. And just to say that we have a large infrastructure project on our doorstep in Cambridge here taking place at the moment. When I wrote the talk, or started writing the talk about a month ago, this is the East-West Rail link, Oxford to Cambridge link. We're still at the planning stage. I think that has just started to be spades in the ground now, but things can still be planned. And I would highly advise, if you could take away one thing from this talk, get involved at the planning stages. Don't wait until you're having to protest in the middle of a development. Much easier to change things at the beginning. So 3 quick slides, I hope, with quite a lot of information on. I'm going to go through pretty quickly, which give you hopefully factual information about HS2, and then we'll get on to the wildlife stuff. So just bear with me a little bit longer. The economics of the project, it costs 102 billion plus. A lot of sources are quoting higher figures than that now, up to 127 billion. £1 billion. I think it's worth reminding ourselves this is 1,000 times 1 million. It's an awful lot of money. And for comparison, in America, Donald Trump's wall, if it was completed, it hasn't been yet, the full cost estimated $21 billion. So a lot less expensive. There's a contingency fund, like most big infrastructure projects have, £1.2 billion. That can be used on pretty much anything. Each train costs £1 million. Thanks to Dave Seeley for putting me onto that information. It's estimated that the London to Birmingham return ticket will cost £200 or more. And so far, £9 billion has been spent. So the project is by no means complete yet. A lot of people are against it, we're finding, and a lot of MPs are opposed to it. Many of them slowly coming out of the woodwork. We'll see it's quite a strong Conservative government at the moment. Okay, one of the arguments for it is levelling up the country. And you might want to ask yourselves, how will moving people more quickly from the north to London do that? So something to think about. The northeast route up to Leeds and whatever is not yet confirmed, or wasn't when I wrote this. I'm pretty sure it still isn't, although a lot more statements have come out in the last few days. And the northwest route is confirmed so far as Crewe, but not to Manchester, which is supposed to be its ultimate destination. So still a certain amount of things which could be changed in this project. Since it was mooted 10 years ago or more, and since it was first started, we've had, of course, this major pandemic. Little account has been taken so far, I think, in the post-COVID work environment, Zoom, which we're in at the moment, of course, how that's affecting the economics for the project. And little account has been taken, of course, of how the economic situation in Britain generally is changing post-COVID. If we can say we're post-COVID yet, sadly not quite. So quite a lot of changes since the project was started. Job creation is another thing given as a good reason for it. 30,000 estimated, that's now dropped to 22,000. You see that the economics of that, the huge cost is quite a lot for those number of jobs. And there are impacts on communities along the route through the Chilterns and off north, if it does go ahead in the north, quite dramatic impacts on those communities. It just has its own political act of Parliament, the High Speed Rail Act, which allows, amongst other things, compulsory purchase of any land and compulsory eviction of people living on that land. So these are perhaps negatives. I think we could probably agree as a project, which helped colour my view of what I thought about it. Final slide that isn't quite wildlife yet, but it's getting there. So environment, how does it affect the environment? So it's estimated it will become carbon neutral in 120 years. This is assuming that the power that moves the trains is carbon neutral itself. One would hope that our country would be well on carbon neutral power by then, but obviously not yet. However, the lifespan of the train itself, the project itself, is said to be 100 years, estimated 100 years. I haven't put sources for all of this information, but this seemed to be quite accurate. So it may never be carbon neutral. The Woodland Trust have stated that 108 ancient woods will be destroyed by the work. Some other authorities have said over 120 ancient woods. Ancient woods are our rainforests. They're highly valuable habitat and should, I think, be protected at all costs. Britain has a large number of ancient woods, relatively. Although nothing like what we used to have. 33 sites of special scientific interest will be destroyed by the project. This is Wildlife Trust data. And 693 other wildlife sites will be destroyed or damaged. This is from the Daily Mail. And I just wanted to add that do you think the Guardian would be the paper you'd go to read about HS2, perhaps, or the Times? Daily Mail gives excellent coverage of everything going on with HS2. One of the journalists about a year ago was on the front line of the protests at Jones Hill Wood and was pushed into the mud by the security. Good for her, she videoed all of this and her colleagues videoed it. She put it online on the Daily Mail website. And ever since then, they've given strong coverage to everything going on with HS2. Not always complimentary, I have to say. But yeah, so for once, I might suggest read the Daily Mail. It's been said to be a green corridor. And in the early stages, there was a lot of talk about this wonderful green corridor that's being created through the country. 7 million trees will be planted. I put it here, planting doesn't necessarily mean surviving. I ran National Tree Week for the UK government for several years, and I know very well that you need an awful lot of aftercare to maintain planted trees. This won't necessarily happen if you have trees planted by contractors, whereas community planting projects, the survival rate is normally very good. There's a lot of talk about replanting the ancient woodland along the route, taking soil and putting it somewhere else and recreating an ancient woodland. So I'll put this in inverted commas because it's patently a rather strange idea, to put it mildly. Lovely if it might happen, but and now a couple of good things that I think are good anyway. The initial habitat plans, at least 10 years ago, were pretty good if they were all going to go ahead. Connecting the remaining woods, for example, with new bands of woodland would probably be a good thing if you accept the whole project should go ahead. And some of these vast funds have been used for wildlife research along the route, including for the very rare Alcantoe bat. This is a European species which has recently been found in Britain, occurs at Denham. The Wildlife Trust there have been given some funds to research it. Slightly ironic, I think, though, given its habitat will be changed pretty dramatically by the HS2 work. But you know, at least that's another good thing, I think, coming out of it. So this leads us into how our wildlife is protected under UK law. So a couple of images here, quick quiz for you. What do you think is protected here? We've got ancient woodland on the left and hedgehog on the right. It's apparently Britain's favourite mammal. So I thought I'd put that in. Ancient woodlands first. Ancient woodlands have no legal protection at all. There is the National Planning Policy Framework for England, which has recently been revised in March this year, I believe, which now states that all applications that would result in a loss or damage to ancient woodland or ancient or veteran trees should be refused unless wholly exceptional. And you'll find that HS2 is referred to as being exceptional during a number of cases that we'll come to in the talk. Trees are protected by can be protected by tree preservation orders. Won't cover that here, but that's a useful tool, particularly for individual trees. Sites of special scientific interest, the creme de la creme of our wildlife sites. Similar protection to ancient woodlands, i.e. not very much. RSPB state a certain amount of planning protection, but in practice this is sometimes not sufficient to prevent development. Possibly slightly tongue-in-cheek there from the RSPB. Hedgehogs, right, let's come on to mammals in a moment. So plants, protected or not, only certain rare species have protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. Otherwise, you can do what you like to plants if you have the landowner's permission. Even quite rare plants. And under the HS2, the High Speed Rail Act, HS2 will purchase all the land that it's going to work on. And this will be the case for most developments. Developers would usually acquire the land before working. So no protection for plants. Mammals. Now our hedgehog, despite being incredibly popular, doesn't have any particular protection. How the mammals that are protected in Britain is quite a curious list. I mean, you can't go out and kill hedgehogs willy-nilly, but their habitat and their homes and whatever have no special protection. It's not the case for all mammals. So you need to look at the Wildlife and Countryside Act, heavily covered online. The Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations, 2010. This is European legislation, which despite Brexit, we are still signed up to. So that's, I guess, a good thing. And badgers get their own special act. We'll come on to badgers towards the end of the talk if we have time. And despite the protection of some wildlife under these acts, you can get licenses to avoid the regulations. I'm going to come on to this for a lot of the rest of the talk. But ironically, I once I used to work for the Ministry of Agriculture as an ecologist back in the 1980s, a pretty long time ago now, and my job was giving out licenses for mammals, not for development, but for farmers or others for agricultural damage, if you like. And after 2 or 3 years, I actually got told off for not giving any licenses apart from one. And mine was for a badger, a particular road badger, which was killing flamingos at Whipsnade Zoo. So that was quite a good reason. That's another long story, but I won't go into here as to about that. Birds, protected also under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. They have strong protection. So whereas birds themselves may not be all that protected, all birds' nests and their contents, eggs and chicks, are protected from intentional destruction, not accidental destruction. All nests, even of common species like pigeons and crows, which don't have any other protection. You can't get licenses to get around that, interestingly. And the rarest species like red kites and other birds of prey are specially protected on Schedule 1. But most birds otherwise have general protection, but aren't particularly protected from development. But the nests are. So I could spend the whole evening talking about birds and nests, but I'm just going to leave it at that for the moment. It's a useful one if you want to influence any potential development. So this is going back to HS2, just a quick look at the route again. And this is to show you the locations of some of the protest camps. There's a lot of camps coming on stream all the time. Sorry about the text slipping over there. Starting at the bottom right, you've got Denham, just within the M25, Jones Hill Wood, which I'll talk about a lot, and the rather wonderfully named War, which is the blue circle next to it, which stands for Wendover Active Resistance. They're both near Wendover in Buckinghamshire. Going north again, I don't know if I can indicate on the map, but you can maybe see the blue circle near Bicester. That is a lovely site called Pause Peace, which will come up later on. And right up north, near my birthplace in Leamington Spa, Crackley Woods protest camp. So, and a little note here, all visitors are welcome at these camps, and whatever you might think about the development, this is history in the making. This is something quite important going on, and it might, well, I would highly recommend visiting a camp when regulations allow. You will be made welcome, and you can ask people, give them your opinion, and see what they think about what's going on. And you can find the camps listed and details of how to find them on the Stop HS2 website, stophs2.org. So it's kind of a little plug to go and visit the camps. As you can tell, I found it very useful. So on to our wildlife. This is what I was looking for, asked to look for at Denham. This is, sorry, let's briefly go back to that. This is a water vole, not highly developed really for an aquatic lifestyle. They don't have webbed feet, as you can see. They have special protection. If you want to kind of enable this protection, or indeed if you want to move them on from your development site, you need to first find evidence that they're there. So you're looking for field signs. You can see this animal is grazing here. Quite big, by the way. They're the size of a brown rat, pretty much. Anyway, a lot of people say. The signs are holes, grazing, tracks and droppings. The left-hand image shows some tracks, a little bit vague. The grazing, they graze in little kind of terraces, lawns sometimes called, where they take their cut vegetation, reeds or grass or whatever, aquatic vegetation, they'll chop it up and eat it in a particular site, safe site. And the droppings you might be able to see in the middle of the right-hand image is pale brown, saturated droppings. So all good evidence for water voles. The burrows themselves, brown rat holes are quite similar, but they don't go underwater or partially underwater, and brown rat holes have tracks in between the rat runs, which are usually pretty evident. Water voles normally come in and out via the water. So the law affecting water voles. So this is the Wildlife and Countryside Act. I won't read all of this out to you, but briefly, and it'll be the same for many other species we're going to look at. It's an offence to not just recklessly damage, destroy, or to disturb, kill, or injure a water vole. It's also an offence to recklessly damage, destroy or obstruct access to any structure or place that a water vole uses for shelter or protection. So basically their homes are protected as well as them. But you'll notice you can get a license here. If you go ahead and damage your water vole burrows or kill a water vole or whatever, maximum fine of £5,000. Not huge, to be honest, in terms of the value of most developments. You can find all this data on the government websites, gov.uk, if you need to look it up. And you go to Natural England. Our colleague Tony Juniper, who's been involved, lives in Cambridge, has been involved in Cambridge wildlife issues for many years, head of Natural England at the moment. You can get a license. So this is Denham Country Park on the left, a stock photo of how this particular bit of water vole habitat used to look. On the right, how it looks now. So HS2 have come in and affected the drainage very much and destroyed quite a bit of the habitat. Under license though, so not breaking any laws. So how do you get a license? Hopefully no developers listening to this. Let's take a glass of water, a sip of water, if I may. But it's relatively easy. You go to the Natural England website, you fill in a form, your license, and you agree to report the actions. Natural England, check your license. That's it. It's really quite a simple thing. Now, luckily, most developers don't tend to do this. In practice, what happens is professional ecologists do this and become their job is then to sell their services to developers. And I was surprised, perhaps, how many of my erstwhile colleagues do this for a living. I understand why there aren't that many jobs in ecology, and many of them make personal judgments about what work they're going to take on. Others arguably don't. The developers, however, do go through the planning process before they do their work, one would hope. So planners ask, this is very generalized obviously, is this development needed? Do we need a new hospital? Do we need HS2? If so, and there's water vole habitat, and the water voles are going to be destroyed, can it be done somewhere else? If no, then check for water voles. Obviously see you have the thing that you want to try and avoid destroying. If present, get your license or bring in someone with a license, catch them and move them elsewhere. And this is what normally happens. Now, and then you destroy their habitat. Not more I could say about that, but I shall move on. This lovely little chap is a hazel dormouse. This is the next species I got involved with training up activists to monitor, and with indeed monitoring myself a little bit. Most of the sites that I showed you on that map earlier in the Chilterns, where the European edible dormouse, Glis, has been introduced from a base at Tring. Been around for quite a few years. So you'd often say to people, so dormouse are protected. We must look for signs of dormice, see if we've got them here along the site that's going to be developed. And everyone would say, oh yes, there's lots of dormice. There was one in my tent last night. There was one in my tree house. He was eating our food sources. Sadly, this is probably edible dormouse, not the protected one. As an introduced species, this has no special protection. This is our native British dormouse, hazel dormouse, very rarely seen. And these are the signs you look for. So you look basically for nuts that have been fed on by dormice to see if you have them or not. And the top left image is where this is dormouse chewed hazelnuts. They do really like hazelnuts. They feed on fruit and other things too. Squirrels are what you most often find, who split the hazelnuts in the bottom right image, and voles top right. Sorry. And wood mice bottom left, they leave quite distinctive teeth marks. Dormice, more or less invisible teeth marks. They're inside the hole, the teeth marks. So you can see whether you have them or not. Here's the law again. So again, I won't read through it all, but the same sort of thing, destroying the animal or destroying its nesting, resting place or breeding site. Slightly stronger protection for dormice. As I say, very strange why some species have different protections to others. Unlimited fine and up to 6 months imprisonment. So, but let's go on again. You can apply for a license again from Natural England, a mitigation license, if the work you are going to do has an impact, or you think it will have an impact on hazel dormice. So you can then, these are the things that you shouldn't be doing, but you can get a license to do these things, to disturb them. Kill them normally doesn't happen, but to destroy the breeding places and to move them on. And I'm just moving my stuff around a little bit so I can see what you can all see. There we are. Yeah, so in the course of my research into all of this, I got in touch with some of the professional ecologists involved in this work, and I was offered work, ironically, on dormice. I was asked, whatever my fees were, that I could double them, and I needed to work for next week, the work starting next week, and to work overnight, 7 nights of the week, basically going through a site, a woodland site that was going to be destroyed, finding dormice, catching them and moving them under license, and then the wood would be destroyed. I was kind of tempted, I mean, mainly price, but I didn't do it. It was, well, again, I could go on more about that, but so this is Pause Peace Camp. The camps are wonderful works of art and complex structures in many cases, designed to hold up developers as much as possible. Sadly, all the woodland to the left of the large oak has now been destroyed since this image was taken last summer, I should say. And this one is probably from the East-West Rail development. It can be hard to tell because there's an enormous amount of secrecy around HS2. Most developers, it's much easier to find out what's going on. The licenses are public, in the public domain. HS2, that's not the case. So this one seems to have been destroyed by East-West Rail, where it joins or goes under or over the high-speed rail link. Nearby here, so this is part of a complex of ancient woodlands. That was an ancient woodland within the Burnwood Forest area. This is Decoy Pond Wood behind HS2 fencing. Wonderful ancient woodland. A large percentage of this is now gone. You can't really get into it to see, and we weren't quick enough to get in there before that was developed. And nearby, the best wood of the lot, I think, this one is still intact. This is Sheep House Wood, SSSI. It's a site for Beckstein's bats, one of our rarest British mammals, only 6 breeding sites known. Unfortunately, the HS2 route runs right beside and just within Sheep House Wood, SSSI. There's also nocturnal and other bat species there, nesting red kite, Schedule 1 bird, tawny owls and other things, and active badger sets. So this is another site I've played quite a big role in looking at. And we focused on bats, and to get a bat license, I'll come on to bat protection in a moment, but bat licenses require a lot more information from developers, or a certain amount of more information. And you can see here that HS2 carried out surveys in the whole area. Some while ago now, surveys have to be up to date. So this has been a project in planning for quite a long time. And they found this most wonderful list of bats. And there are very few bats in England that don't occur on this list, I think, that would occur in woodlands. What this meant was they could still apply for licenses. Obviously, they needed the information first to know what was there. These are the protection laws again for bats, Wildlife and Countryside Act. Same thing, destroying the bat itself, or its roost or breeding site. Now, just a slight digression here, because there are, of course, other options than just destroying sheep house SSSI and the Burnwood Forest area, aren't there? One could change the route. Now, the reason HS2 is fast is it's primarily a straight line, but it could be changed. And in the early stages, it was changed. The route was changed to avoid a golf course. So this is shown here, not the actual golf course, I must say. So it's hard, but not impossible. And much of the development is not the railway route itself. It's associated compounds, access road, dumps for waste material, all of which could be moved and could be elsewhere. Many of these are occurring in the ancient woods and SSSIs, which I think is very bad. You could wait until the bat roosts are unoccupied. They are seasonal. Generally, you have winter roosts and summer roosts, possibly a third category of maternity roosts. Or you can go ahead and get the license, which is what HS2 have done in most cases. This details the licenses. Again, apology for all the heavy text. Don't feel you have to read it all. This is from Natural England's website. And I've highlighted the bits that I think are particularly kind of relevant and important here. 3 kinds of licenses for bats. A class license for bats issued for activities that have a low to moderate impact on bats. Under this license, contractors are required to have specific skills or experience to avoid risk to the conservation and welfare of bats. So this is the kind of, you can always go ahead and fell your woodland if you don't think there are any or many bats in it. An organizational license, you can see here that these can be for HS2 applicable across a wide area, in some cases for the entire route of phase 1. So HS2 have an organizational license which covers them for a number of changes, a number of things within breaking wildlife laws, you might say, for which they don't have to then apply again. And then individual licenses, these tend to be for the rarer bat species, although it's not exactly entirely just that. And the key one at the bottom there, mitigation licenses to permit work associated with the felling of trees used by bats. It doesn't say just for the rarest bats. In practice, it's an option. If you've got rare bats, then you have to go for these special licenses. And this is what a license kind of looks like. So I'm not going to show you the whole 53 pages of the license. This is from Ashbeds, Covington, Warwickshire, which is part of the Burnwood site. The summary is my own, I'm afraid, but the information was obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request. Most developers, you'll find the information is in the public domain. So if you're looking at other developments, you shouldn't have to go through FOIs. The license initially goes through desk surveys to see what might be there in terms of bats. For this particular site, they didn't find quite as many bats as for the whole site, but they found Barberstell, very rare, and Brant, very rare. They found 85 trees with moderate to high potential roost features to be checked by a qualified ecologist using endoscopes, a bit like a surgeon's endoscope. So you go up in the tree, look down, see if there are any bats in holes or other structures. It should be done 24 hours prior to felling. If nothing is found, the tree can be felled. If something is found, then under license, the bats can be removed by a qualified ecologist. And that's all the licenses say of this particular license. They do vary a bit. So it's removed by an ecologist. in practice released outside the site of development, but the habitat and the roost has been destroyed. So I'll leave you to decide what you think about that. There are statements within the license about erecting bat boxes to replace the lost roosts. This should be done before the trees are felled. Veteranization, which is working with existing trees to make them more bat friendly, you might say, so cutting them, putting in artificial holes, removing limbs, that kind of thing. Plant new trees to replace the habitat. But the license does note that the 30 to 50 year period for these trees to replace those lost is noted. You can't, obviously you can't wait for 30 to 40 years, but this is what you have to do. This is what the license enables you to do for this particular site. Now, I'm going to go on to another site now, Jones Hill Wood. This is Jones Hill Wood. This is perhaps my favourite site of the lot. I've spent the most time. It's near Wendover. It's an ancient Chilterns beechwood, so rather different to our ancient oak woods that we know from East Anglia. And it was the inspiration for Roald Dahl's children's book, The Fantastic Mr. Fox. He lived quite nearby. This is how it looked when I first went there. This is my image. These are one of the Earth Protectors camps up in the trees to try to protect the woodland. A number of these were created, and this is how the wood looked when I was last there. Well, not quite when I was last there. This is still, yeah, this is still the end of last year. So this is a beech wooded, a beech I've got leaves on, I should say, but quite a lot of change. Everything the other side of the fence will go at some point. There's 24-hour security here. The orange, you can see the guys in the black are a higher level of security, called black onyx. The kind of things I never thought I would learn in British wildlife studies. And something interesting about Jones Hill Wood. So this is an article from The Guardian, and I'm going to read it to you. So we found barbastelle in Jones Hill Wood, and we found that HS2 hadn't even checked the woods, or they didn't find anything in the woods. It decided they were low quality woods. They didn't apply for their mitigation license. So lawyers have warned HS2 that it may be felling trees illegally after an ecology report found evidence of one of the UK's rarest bats, barbastelle, in an area of ancient woodland being cleared for the high-speed rail line. These are the colleagues in Lee Day. The legal firm Lee Day wrote to HS2, urging them to stop activity at Jones Hill Wood, as they do not have a license, which could disturb, license to disturb rare barbastelle bat risks. If they continue to do so, this would be a wildlife criminal offence. 3 independent ecologists, of which I'm proud to be one, use bat detector equipment to track the barbastelles, protected species listed as near threatened on the global IUCN Red List, and compiled a report of their findings. The others were colleagues and people that I'd trained up to do this work. So a lot more than just people, trained activists, were really into doing all of this. Paul Powersland, Paul Powersland, a barrister at Garden Court Chambers and founder of Lawyers for Nature, a wonderful organisation which is involved in the case, said this is the best evidence that Lawyers for Nature have seen of protected wildlife being interfered with by HS2 without licence. We don't really like to cry wolf about these things. We've asked them to stop work and get an independent ecologist who's separate from HS2 to do a proper survey of the woods. If they don't, then they would appear to be happy going ahead in circumstances in which they may be committing a wildlife crime. And this is why I put the whole article in, really. Not so you can see me being mentioned, but obviously Cambridge Natural History Society is in there, in The Guardian, quoting me saying, it is such a rare bat that we really need to protect every colony, and the law is very clear about that. Every colony is protected. The last thing any of us wants are bats destroyed, whether you're for HS2 or against H2 is irrelevant, really. So this was in October when I was independent and not particularly against HS2. I think I can honestly say that has changed. What have I done there? Sorry, I've gone. How do I get back to the current slide? Sorry about that. I don't know if anybody, Jonathan, can help me get back to the screen share.
You should just be able to restart from where you are. But
brilliant. Thanks.
I see it's backing up.
No.
That looks like it's doing it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just backed up a little bit. Thanks. So some more images from Jonas Hill Wood. And this is the latest news, pretty much, from Jonas Hill Wood. In March 2021, after much discussion with Natural England, HS2 appear to accept our evidence of Barbastelle roosts. Their own ecologists did find a bat, a pipistrelle, this time around. We think that the felling has been halted until the bats have left their roost, to which case a license arguably wouldn't be needed. But we're now into the bird nesting season until at least July. And as we've said, all birds are protected, all nests are protected, and no licenses are available. So hopefully this development is paused at this particular woodland until at least July. Right, last species, if I'm not overrunning time or whatever. There's lots we could talk about here, but badgers. Badgers get their own act. And I think that was to do with the furore a few years ago about badger digging and badger baiting. So if you want to get a species protected, get your MPs to put an act forward to protect it. So badgers, despite not being as rare as hedgehogs or anything like as rare as voles, which have experienced a huge decline in the last few years, but obviously are worth protecting badgers anyway. So they get their special act. But again, you can get a license to get around their act. This is what the Protection of Badgers Act covers. Again, killing the badger, certain things to do with badger baiting, and damaging or destroying its set, its home. So this is what your license allows you, and this is the operational license that we mentioned during the discussion about bat licenses. So this is a general license, I believe, that HS2 have for the whole route. I could be wrong about that, but they may need to apply for specific licenses for particular areas, but I don't think so. So it allows them to do this to a badger set. Prior to this, so they're obviously blocking the set. Prior to this, they put in gates, so the one-way gates, which are left open. So the idea is the badgers can go in and out of their sets until such time as the developers want to go ahead with destroying the habitat or whatever, and then they lock the gates. This can't be done during the breeding season of badgers, but it can be done during the rest of the year. And then the badgers can't get back in. All this netting stops them digging new holes. In theory, most licenses suggest you should have an artificial set nearby. In practice, badgers rarely use artificial sets. So there's normally a pretty high increase in badger deaths on the roads nearby when these works go on. And presumably they do at some point develop new sets nearby within their territories. Obviously highly territorial animals, and they can't just go anywhere if there are other badgers around in residence. So just some conclusions that you might find useful if you have a development going on near you. Where are we? Right. Highlight absolutely the most important thing, I think. Get involved early on. Engage with the planning process at the earliest possible opportunity. Get routes around ancient woodlands, stop developers building housing estates on SSSIs. If the project has to go ahead, then make sure it goes ahead somewhere with minimal wildlife damage, particularly to our most important wildlife sites. Be aware of the laws on protected species and monitor how they're implemented. Hopefully this talk's helped a little bit. Plenty of references online, Wildlife and Countryside Act particularly, and don't expect the developers to just stick within the law. They're much more likely to if they think that you are watching them and monitoring them. Collect evidence of what's going on, particularly video and labeled images using apps like What's 3 Words or GPS details, so that if you do have to go to court, you have an irrefutable evidence of what's going on. The fact that the wildlife that is protected is there, because often people say it's not there, we didn't need a license, or that the license has not been adhered to. Inform your developers of potential crimes, because otherwise they can say, well, we didn't know. Most of the wildlife protection we've just been looking at has an exclusion, kind of exclusion clause for accidental damage and destruction. And if you think the law is being broken, any law, then of course you call the police. You can use the 111 number if you think a crime may be likely to happen soon, or 999 if it is happening, whether that's a wildlife crime or any other crime. All police units now have access to a wildlife crime officer. Many of them are very helpful and are trained with good ecological knowledge. Not all of them, but many of them. Engage with the public. Often the legal process will not be enough to stop things going ahead and to stop laws being broken, sadly. But public opinion is really strong, and most developers do not want negative public opinion. The media, the press are always looking for good stories, and social media, of course, is a great way of sharing what you know and what's going on, and of getting others to help you and to support you. And work with other groups. It's really tough doing this by yourself. So people like the Woodland Trust, the Wildlife Trusts, RSPB, many local interested groups, depending on where you are. So the Chiltern Society were a great ally, are a great ally within the HS2 development. And support these organizations anyway, particularly during COVID, that they've had a hard time, a lot of them, trying to make a living. But they are powerful, particularly RSPB, incredibly powerful political organization. And talking of politicians, maintain a dialogue, I've put here rather politely, I think, with involved politicians, whatever your project is, particularly when elections are near. This is when politicians tend to really listen to us. And there are local council elections coming up in May. Otherwise, you've got to wait for national elections, I think, several years yet. But they do have, they do listen, national politicians too, to some extent. It's always worth talking to them. The majority of the population do not bother to interact with our politicians, MPs, so they will hopefully listen to you. And finally, don't give up. It's every little victory helps. Don't get too demoralized when your site appears to be on the verge of destruction. You might have kept it, an ancient woodland, going for a few more weeks or months or years, or you might even be able to stop a major infrastructure project like HS2. Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully there's somebody there.
Hello,
Duncan,
Kevin. Right, well done. Thank you for that lovely talk. Now what we will do is invite anybody who wants to do questions to submit them via chat. And we've got Oops, where is it? Right, yes, so you can now ask questions using chat. And the first question, which comes from Janet Bubbins, is what about hares?
Okay, so I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an ecologist. I know hares have protection, particularly to do with hare coursing. So there are quite strict rules along through that. Hares, you probably know, don't have really closely defined territories, and they don't have homes like badger setts or water voles. They're little scrapes where they give birth are fairly temporary. So you're probably looking at trying to protect the individual animals. How useful that would be in terms of development, I don't know. It's not one that we've tried to engage with the HS2 work, although we do have hares on some of the sites. So, but there is an act that covers hare coursing, and I think Wildlife and Countryside Act check that. Sorry, that's not a terribly helpful answer.
Any more questions? All right, another one from Janet. I have badgers visiting my garden and we're fighting development in the field behind we have. So Sharon asks, thank you for an excellent talk. I'm actually involved in trying to get EWR to change the route of their final approach into Cambridge as a route that they dismissed is potentially less environmentally damaging according to the Wildlife Trust. Can we get in touch with you, please?
Yes, yes, you can. I haven't had much time to get involved with the EWR, and I would like to. And I'm sure that many other people in Cambridge would like to be more involved in this. We're all a bit limited in time. I'm not sure what the best way for you to get in touch with me is, but perhaps if you wanted to, I don't see the chats, interestingly, or I can't easily see how to see them, but perhaps if you wanted to put some contact details through to Jonathan, you probably on his email list if you're not at the talk, perhaps he wouldn't mind passing them on to me later.
Right.
I'd be very happy to get in touch. An email.
Similar question from Sarah. Have you come across Cambridge approaches who are looking at the EWR route? So yeah, I mean, everybody I think locally is concerned about that and the effect that it could potentially have.
I think the Wildlife Trust has an opinion about it, so it's well worth looking at their websites to see what they think.
Natalie West says, have you seen anything to suggest HS2 might be paused or cancelled?
This is the big question. Yes, paused, definitely. I've been amazed how effective this use of wildlife law and wildlife monitoring to slow things down has been. I think if we'd realized this and clicked this back and put a legal challenge in to HS2 a year or two ago now, and if we'd all got involved then, I'm really sorry I didn't. I just didn't think it was anything that involved me, or I wasn't sure if it was a good thing or not, as I've said earlier. Anyway, we've had an impact, definitely. We are having an impact, and we're stopping sites for work at particular sites for weeks or months. The big question is, will it be enough to stop the whole project? And I think public opinion is changing against the project as more people know more about HS2. And hopefully that will be reflected by MPs' views. They should represent us as members of the voting public. And if enough MPs go against it, then it can be voted out. That's the way it will happen. And I think with the current huge borrowing costs that we have and the very different economic landscape to when HS2 was first mooted, there must be a very good case for it being stopped and cancelled. And as I said, only 9 billion has been spent on it so far out of a projected 100 billion plus. So there's plenty of money to be saved by stopping it even at this point.
Right. Sharon says, certainly, thank you very much. Yes, Cambridge approaches are uniting affected parishes. I can see it. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to actually find a way into Cambridge, I think. Cameron says, are licenses given easily accessible to the public how can we keep an eye out for potentially destructive developments?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question, isn't it? There are organisations, I think, within Cambridge Past, Present and Future is a very good one for monitoring, doing the monitoring on our behalf, and then flagging up controversial developments. So the various new guided busways that have been proposed is one that they've been involved in very much. You don't really, one probably doesn't really have time to check all the planning legislation and planning issues that are going on. So you're really relying on other interested organisations to tell us as members and supporters what's going on. And for most development, you shouldn't have to go through freedom of information requests to find out what they're doing and to find out what licenses they have. It should be a requirement of the wildlife licenses when they're given out. They should be in the public domain, and they should rightly be checked by anyone who wants to check them.
Will O'Connor says, thanks, Kevin. Really interesting. Depressing to see how many ancient woodlands will be destroyed. What a shame. Do you know how they justified avoiding the golf course, but not the ancient woodland?
Well, you'd be wrong of me to say that the Old Boy Network played any part in that. But, well, I suppose I've said it now. It may have just been easier to avoid a golf course. I think, so to be honest, I think they felt that there was a strong opposition to developing over the golf course. Both members of the golf course and others, and they didn't think there would be such a strong opinion against destroying ancient woodland. So this is what we've been able to change around. I think all of us who are involved in nature conservation. What's more important to the world, an ancient woodland or a golf course? A golf course can be great if you like playing golf, but ancient woodlands are irreplaceable.
Bob Johnson says, what can we do to help stop HS2?
Tell your MP what you think. Daniel Zeichner was initially in favour of HS2. It was actually a Labour proposal. Daniel Zeichner is the Cambridge MP, of course. He's now a little more on the fence. Each time I write to him, he gets a little bit more cagey about the whole thing. It's getting very bad press. So I think keep up a discussion about it too. So talk to your MPs, talk to other politicians, talk to those politicians like the Transport and others who have a great say in what goes on with our infrastructure, and share what you know and what you think with your friends and groups that you're involved in. Get everybody, if everybody writes to their MP, everybody writes, then that MP will do what we say.
Janet Bubbins said, sadly, such lovely places as Crackley Woods and Cubbington Pear are already destroyed. We can't get them back. To find out development, CPRE is a good source. We have employed Green Willow Wildlife. Paul Marden says, thank you for a fascinating talk, Kevin. Is there any legal requirement for routes to be provided for wildlife to cross from one side of the tracks or motorway to the other? I worry about gene pools in isolated pockets of wildlife not being large enough to be viable.
Very good point, particularly with train lines and roads. We know that's a problem. Legal requirements would come in at the planning stage. So they might be ways of mitigating the effect of a development. You always have to be a little wary with those, because if you suggest them early on, I think then the developers, it almost gives the developers permission to go ahead and fragment the wildlife population and say they're going to put a green bridge in over the road or railway. But if the project's definitely going ahead, there's nothing in law that says you have to do that, I don't think, but it would be good politics for the developer to do it. How often they're used, I don't know. I mean, dormice do use them in quiet locations. Don't know how far they go over them. Badgers and other animals will go underneath roads. I think the A14 has routes underneath for badgers, and also amphibians, which move distances across to their breeding sites. So it's a very good point. Yeah, try and get those in at the early stages.
Okay. Monica says, Cambridge Cycling Campaign monitors planning applications that affect cycle routes and provision and related transport issues.
Good, excellent.
Cameron says, to add an answer to Bob's question, phone your MP. I've called Anthony Brown's office numerous times with mixed response. Let them know you don't support it.
Yes.
And Annie says HS2 cleared holly scrub around the trees in JHW. Where's JHW?
That's Jones Hill Wood.
Oh, right. Yeah. About 2 weeks ago, to ensure no nesting birds or for later felling. Do you know many species of bats that use bat boxes regularly?
So the two separate questions, or?
It says, have you know? I think perhaps it means, how do you know how many species of bats use bat boxes regularly?
Okay, I'm going to just pick up on the scrub clearance one, because there's a number of unscrupulous developers, including, it has to be said, Cambridge University fairly recently, will put up netting or do other things prior to the bird nesting season to prevent birds nesting in the trees or woodland or whatever that they want to fell. You may remember that was in the local press last year, I think, Cambridge University. Very controversial. Obviously, birds get stuck in netting, and I think they stopped it pretty quickly. Removal of the wildlife habitat that you think birds or other things might be in prior, yeah, that's kind of within the law, or is it? It probably is. Doesn't seem right to me. But and then the bat question, bat boxes, I'm not enough of an expert to know. I know that pipistrelles use them. Some of the other commoner species will use them. So there certainly are alternatives to trees that are going to be felled. If you can't do anything about stopping the felling of the tree, then a bat box is an alternative. But I'm not sure that the rarer species like barbastelle have ever been recorded using bat boxes. I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Peter Pilbeam says, I think the person meant Green Willow Associates for Wildlife Matters. Monica says, what can we do to educate more people about the importance of habitats and the protection of species?
More talks like this, maybe. We're going to make this talk, I mean, you probably know that most talks are available to members of CNHS to watch after the event. This one, if we can master the technology, or if I can, this will be available on YouTube, we hope, so that a wider audience can see it in perpetuity. A slightly facetious answer, I think, but anything about, as we said earlier, about HS2, let more people know what the laws are, how important wildlife habitat is, join the organisations and support the organisations that do this kind of work, and tell friends and family and associates that you think wildlife's important, and how much, I think particularly now after or during the pandemic, so many more people are spending time in nature, and there must be an even greater opinion in favour of nature and against big development than there was perhaps when HS2 was first mooted.
Jonathan Shanklin says that the Chisholm Trail has destroyed or damaged at least 3 wildlife sites. That's in Cambridge, which just shows the conflict, perhaps, that there is between green cycling and protection of wildlife. Janet Bubbin says, join local groups. I'm chair of the Friends of Thurfield Heath and Greens, trying to make local people aware of the importance of the rare chalk grasslands.
Yeah, definitely. Well done.
Yeah. Monica Frisch says, I think economic arguments are also powerful.
Yes, I think ultimately economic arguments will be what will stop HS2.
Yeah, Sharon says, talk on YouTube. Excellent talk. Thank you. I know a lot of people in the local village working groups opposing EWR will find this talk very useful. So thank you. And I think that's the end of all the questions. So well done, Jonathan, Kevin. You've certainly stimulated a lot of thoughts and discussion and debate. It's an interesting topic, something quite different to what we've had talks about previously this year. So thank you very much, and well done, and a big round of applause from everybody. Unfortunately, you can't hear them or see them, so I've no doubt everyone will.
Got my last image. I've just put it up now. So,
anyway,
thanks very much, everybody. Lovely to talk to you, and thanks to Duncan and Jonathan for hosting this, and to Monica for organising all these wonderful talks.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And yes, thanks to Monica, because this whole series of talks has been really very good. We've had some very good speakers, and Monica in particular works particularly hard on putting them together. So well done, Monica. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
And good night all, and thank you, Kevin. And I'll stop the recording and